You think you're protecting yourself. You think the walls you've built, the masks you wear, the stories you tell yourself at 3 in the morning are keeping you safe. But what if I told you that the very things you believe are shielding you from pain are actually the architects of your suffering? What if the behaviors you've normalized, the patterns you've accepted as just part of being human, are silently eroding the only thing that truly matters, your capacity to feel alive? This isn't about productivity, this isn't about success. This is about pleasure in its deepest, most philosophical sense. The pleasure of existing without the constant hum of anxiety, the pleasure of being present in your own skin, and there are 5 behaviors, 5 quiet destroyers, that stand between you and that state. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you stop accepting them, everything changes. Let's start with the first behavior. And it's one that's so woven into the fabric of modern existence that most people don't even recognize it as a problem. I'm talking about the behavior of constant comparison. Not just comparing yourself to others, though that's part of it. I'm talking about the deeper mechanism, the one where you've turned your entire life into a measuring contest against some invisible standard that doesn't even exist. You wake up and immediately check how you stack up. Am I productive enough? Am I attractive enough? Am I experiencing enough? And here's the philosophical trap: hedonism. True hedonism isn't about having more, it's about experiencing more deeply. But comparison flattens experience. It turns a sunset into a commodity. It turns a conversation into a performance. It turns pleasure itself into a metric. Epicurus understood this thousands of years ago. He didn't advocate for endless indulgence. He advocated for the removal of pain, and he identified one of the greatest pains as the anxiety that comes from wanting what others have. The hedonic treadmill isn't just about adapting to material gains. It's about the psychological structure of never being satisfied because you're always measuring yourself against an external reference point. And the cruelest part? That reference point keeps moving. Social media didn't create this problem. It just made it visible. It weaponized it. Now you're not just comparing yourself to your neighbor, you're comparing yourself to a curated highlight reel of millions of people, most of whom are also pretending. Think about the last time you felt genuine, uncomplicated pleasure. Not pleasure that you needed to photograph or share or justify, just pure, present moment satisfaction. How long ago was it? For most people, it's been years. Because comparison creates a filter between you and reality. You're never actually in the experience. You're always one step removed, evaluating whether this moment is good enough, whether you're feeling the right things, whether this is the optimal way to spend your time. And that evaluation process is the death of pleasure. True pleasure requires surrender. It requires you to stop measuring and start feeling. But you can't do that when you've trained your mind to constantly audit your life against everyone else's. The second behavior is more insidious because it masquerades as wisdom. I'm talking about emotional suppression disguised as stoicism. Now, before you come at me, I'm not attacking Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius and Seneca understood something profound about suffering. But what's happened in popular culture is a bastardization of these ideas into a kind of emotional numbness that people wear as armor. You've been taught that feeling too much is weakness, that caring too deeply is naive, that vulnerability is a liability. And so, you've learned to flatten your emotional landscape, to keep everything at arm's length, to never let anything penetrate too deeply. And you call this strength. But here's what you're actually doing. You're not preventing pain, you're preventing pleasure, because they come from the same place. You cannot selectively numb. When you close yourself off to suffering, you simultaneously close yourself off to joy. This is basic emotional physics. The depth of your capacity for pain is directly proportional to your capacity for pleasure. And when you spend your energy trying to eliminate one, you eliminate both. You end up in this gray middle zone where nothing really hurts, but nothing really feels good either. You're safe? Sure, but you're not alive. And that safety starts to feel like a prison. Nietzsche saw this coming. He warned against the last man, the person who has eliminated all risk, all danger, all intensity from life in pursuit of comfort. The last man blinks and says, "We have invented happiness, But it's not happiness, it's the absence of feeling. It's emotional anesthesia. And the philosophical problem here is that hedonism, properly understood, is about the fullness of experience. It's about saying yes to life in all its intensity. But you can't say yes to life when you're constantly trying to protect yourself from it. You can't experience deep pleasure when you're unwilling to risk deep pain. And yet, this is exactly what most people do. They optimize for safety and wonder why they feel dead inside. And if you've been resonating with this, maybe it's time to join the space where we go deeper every week. You know where the button is. The third behavior is one that almost everyone engages in. And it's so normalized that suggesting it's a problem sounds radical. I'm talking about the addiction to future projection. The constant mental habit of living anywhere but now. You're always planning, always anticipating, always working towards some future version of yourself or your life that will finally be good enough. And this seems productive. It seems like ambition. But what it actually is a refusal to be present. It's a rejection of the only moment in which pleasure can actually be experienced. Here's the thing about pleasure that most people miss. It only exists in the present tense. You cannot experience pleasure in the past. That's just memory. You cannot experience pleasure in the future. That's just imagination. Pleasure happens now, or it doesn't happen at all. But you've trained yourself to defer it. You'll be happy when you get the promotion. You'll relax when the project is done. You'll enjoy life when you retire. And this might sound like delayed gratification, which we're told is a virtue. But there's a difference between strategically postponing something and psychologically refusing to inhabit your present reality. What you're actually doing is bargaining with existence. You're saying, I'll start living when conditions are right. But conditions are never right. There's always something else. Always another milestone. Another goal. Another thing that needs to happen first. And meanwhile, your life is happening right now. The moments you're sacrificing to some imagined future perfect state are the only moments you actually have. And you're missing them because you're mentally somewhere else. This is the opposite of hedonistic philosophy. Epicurus would tell you that the pleasure of being alive, of having a body that works, of being able to think and feel and experience, is available right now. But you have to be here to access it. And the really tragic part is that even when you achieve the thing you were working toward, you don't stop. You don't suddenly become present. You just set a new goal and continue the pattern. Because the pattern isn't about the goals, it's about avoiding the present moment. It's about staying busy enough that you never have to confront the question. If I stopped chasing, if I just existed right here, would that be enough? And that question terrifies people. Because what if the answer is no? What if you've built your entire identity around striving, and without it, you don't know who you are? But the real answer, the one you're afraid to discover, is that presence itself is enough. That the simple fact of existing, of breathing, of perceiving the world, is its own form of pleasure. But you'll never know that if you're always mentally in next street. The fourth behavior is one that cuts deep because it involves the people you love. I'm talking about the need for external validation disguised as connection. You've convinced yourself that you need other people's approval to feel good, that their recognition, their praise, their attention is what makes your experiences real. And this seems like it's about relationship, about community, about being social. But what it actually is outsourcing your sense of self-worth to people who are just as confused as you are. Think about how much of your behavior is shaped by what you think others will think. How many decisions you make based on how they'll look rather than how they'll feel. How much energy you spend managing impressions, curating personas, making sure people see you a certain way, and you tell yourself, this is just being considerate, just being socially aware. But underneath it is a profound lack of internal validation. You don't trust your own experience. You don't believe that something is worthwhile unless someone else confirms it. And this is a direct assault on your capacity for pleasure. Because pleasure, in its purest form, is entirely subjective. It's about your direct experience of reality, unmediated by anyone else's opinion. When you eat something delicious, the pleasure is in the tasting, not in someone else's approval of your choice. When you feel the sun on your skin, the pleasure is in the sensation, not in being seen, feeling it. But you've corrupted this pleasure, contingent on validation. And now, you can't enjoy anything unless it's witnessed, unless it's approved, unless it earns you some form of social currency. You're performing your life instead of living it. The Epicurean tradition understood that true pleasure comes from simple, self-sufficient experiences. A conversation with a friend, yes, but not because the friend validates you, because the conversation itself is pleasurable. The difference is subtle but crucial. One is about genuine connection, the other is about using connection to fill a void of truth. And you can feel the difference if you're honest with yourself. When you do something and immediately think about how you'll describe it to others, you're not fully in it. When you achieve something and feel empty until someone else acknowledges it, you're not accessing real satisfaction. You're accessing a temporary hit of validation that will fade as soon as you're alone with yourself again. And this creates a vicious cycle. The more you rely on external validation, the less you develop internal satisfaction. The less internal satisfaction you have, the more desperately you seek external validation. And all the while, your capacity for simple, direct pleasure atrophies. You lose the ability to just be with yourself, to find contentment in your own experience, to feel good without an audience. And that loss is catastrophic, because ultimately, you are the only person who will be with you for your entire life. If you can't find pleasure in your own presence, you're in for a very long, very empty existence. If this is hitting different for you, maybe it's worth sticking around for what comes next. That button doesn't just subscribe you to a channel, it keeps you connected to ideas that actually matter. Now we arrive at the fifth behavior, and this is the one that ties all the others together. This is the master pattern that enables all the rest. I'm talking about the refusal to examine your own assumptions about what pleasure actually is. You've inherited a definition of pleasure from your culture, your family, your peer group, and you've never questioned it. You think you know what feels good, you think you know what you want, but you're operating on autopilot, chasing secondhand desires that were programmed into you before you were old enough to think critically about them. What does pleasure mean to you? Not what should it mean, not what you've been told it means. What does your direct experience tell you actually feels good? For most people, the honest answer is disturbing. Because when you strip away the conditioning, when you remove the social programming and the advertising and the aspirational imagery, what actually brings you pleasure is often much simpler than what you're chasing, and much different. You've been told that pleasure is accumulation. More money, more status, more experiences, more stuff. But is that true in your lived experience? Or does accumulation just create more anxiety, more maintenance, more things to worry about losing? You've been told that pleasure is intensity, the biggest high, the most extreme experience, the most dramatic moment. But is that true? Or is the pursuit of intensity actually exhausting, leaving you depleted and craving recovery? The hedonic paradox is real. The more directly you chase pleasure, the more it eludes you, because you're chasing a concept, not a reality. You're pursuing what you think pleasure should be, rather than what it actually is for you, specifically in your unique nervous system and psychological makeup. Epicurus made a distinction that most modern hedonists ignore. He talked about kinetic pleasures and catastematic pleasures. Kinetic pleasures are active, dynamic, what we usually think of as fun. The pleasure of eating when you're hungry, of drinking when you're thirsty, of sex, of excitement. But catastematic pleasures are something else entirely. They're the pleasure of having already satisfied a need. The pleasure of not being hungry, the pleasure of not being in pain, the pleasure of tranquility itself. And he argued that catastematic pleasure is actually superior because it's more stable, more sustainable, less dependent on external circumstances. But we've lost this distinction entirely. We only recognize kinetic pleasure. We only value the high, the peak, the intense moment. And so we're constantly chasing, constantly seeking the next hit. And we never stop long enough to experience the deeper, quieter pleasure of simply being at peace. Of having a body that doesn't hurt, of having a mind that isn't tormented by anxiety, of existing in a state of contentment that doesn't require anything to happen. This is the pleasure you've been overlooking while you chase everything else, and it's available right now, but you have to stop long enough to notice it. The refusal to examine your assumptions about pleasure is really a refusal to take responsibility for your own experience. Because if you actually investigated what brings you genuine satisfaction, you might discover that you've been wasting years pursuing things that don't actually feel good. You might realize that the life you're building is designed for someone else's version of pleasure, not yours. And that realization would require you to make changes. Big changes. And change is terrifying. So instead, you just keep following the script. Keep chasing the conventional markers of success and pleasure. Keep wondering why you feel empty despite having everything you're supposed to want. But here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. Most people die without ever experiencing sustained inner peace. Not because it's impossible, not because they didn't have the right circumstances, but because they spent their entire lives accepting behaviors that made it impossible. They compared themselves into misery. They suppressed their emotions until they couldn't feel anything. They lived in the future instead of the present. They outsourced their worth to other people's opinions. And they never questioned whether they were even chasing the right thing. And maybe you're thinking, this is too philosophical, too abstract. You want practical steps. You want a list of things to do. But that's part of the problem. You're still looking for an external solution to an internal pattern. The behaviors we've been talking about aren't things you need to add to your life. They're things you need to stop accepting. And stopping is harder than starting, because stopping requires you to sit with discomfort, to feel what you've been avoiding, to confront the possibility that you've been wrong about what matters. So what does it actually look like to stop accepting these behaviors? It starts with noticing, just noticing when you're comparing. When you catch yourself evaluating your life against someone else's, stop. Don't judge yourself for it. Don't try to fix it. Just notice it. See how it feels in your body. See how it changes your present moment experience, and then make a choice. You can continue down that mental path, or you can bring your attention back to your direct experience. What's actually here right now, not how it compares to something else. What is it? When you notice yourself suppressing emotion, trying to stay in control, keeping everything at arm's length, stop. Ask yourself, what am I actually afraid of? What would happen if I let this feeling be here without managing it? And then experiment. Let yourself feel something fully, just for a moment. Not indulging it, not wallowing in it. Just allowing it to exist without resistance. You might be surprised to discover that feelings, when you actually let them move through you instead of fighting them, don't destroy you, they pass. And on the other side of them is often a kind of relief, even a kind of pleasure in having been fully alive to the experience. When you notice yourself living in the future, planning and anticipating instead of being present, stop. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding right now? Because future projection is almost always avoidance. You're avoiding the discomfort of the present moment by escaping into imagination, and the practice here is simple but not easy. Come back, feel your breath, feel your body. Notice what's around you, and notice that the present moment, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's boring, is actually bearable. More than bearable, it's the only place where life actually happens. When you notice yourself seeking validation, shaping your behavior to manage how others see you, stop. Ask yourself, what would I do if no one was watching? What would I choose if there was no social credit, no approval, no recognition? And then do that thing, even in small ways. Order the food you actually want, not the one that makes you look sophisticated. Spend your Saturday the way that actually sounds good to you, not the way that will make a good story. And notice what happens. Notice if the world ends. Notice if people actually judge you as harshly as you feared. And more importantly, notice how it feels to make choices based on your own internal compass instead of external expectations. We're getting close to something important here. And if you feel like this conversation is one you need to keep having, you know what to do. This isn't just content. This is a practice. And practice requires consistency. And when you notice yourself operating on unexamined assumptions about pleasure, stop. Get curious. Ask yourself, does this actually feel good to me? Not does it seem like it should feel good? Not does it feel good to other people? Does it feel good to me, right now, in my direct experience? And be willing to be surprised by the answer? You might discover that some of the things you thought were pleasurable are actually just habits, or status signals, or ways of avoiding something else. And you might discover that some of the things you've been dismissing as too simple or too boring are actually deeply satisfying when you give them your full attention. This is the path back to inner peace, but it's not a comfortable path. Because peace doesn't come from having the right circumstances. It comes from having the right relationship with whatever circumstances you have. It comes from being able to experience your life directly, without the constant mediation of comparison, suppression, projection, validation seeking, and unexamined assumptions. And getting to that place requires you to confront everything you've been using those behaviors to avoid. You know what most people do when they start to see these patterns? They get excited for about 3 days. They see the truth of what's been happening. They commit to change, and then the discomfort hits. The discomfort of being present with yourself, the discomfort of feeling your feelings, the discomfort of not knowing how you're doing relative to everyone else. And they retreat. They go back to the familiar patterns because familiar suffering is more comfortable than unfamiliar freedom. And this is the real test. This is where you find out if you actually want inner peace or if you just want to think about wanting it. Because here's what no one tells you. Inner peace isn't peaceful at first. At first, it's confronting. It means facing everything you've been running from. It means sitting with the anxiety you've been managing through comparison, sitting with the sadness you've been suppressing, sitting with the emptiness you've been filling with future fantasies, sitting with the unworthiness you've been covering with validation, and sitting with the fear that maybe you've been wrong about everything. That's not a light Sunday afternoon realization. That's the work of a lifetime. But on the other side of that confrontation is something extraordinary. The discovery that you're actually okay, that you don't need to be anyone other than who you are. That pleasure isn't something you have to earn or achieve or optimize for. It's your natural state when you stop doing the things that prevent it. The pleasure of existing without constant self-evaluation, the pleasure of feeling without needing to control the feeling, the pleasure of being here now instead of always somewhere else, the pleasure of being enough for yourself, the pleasure of reality itself, unmediated and direct. This is what hedonism actually means when you strip away all the cultural baggage. It's not about maximizing intense experiences. It's not about indulgence or consumption or accumulation. It's about removing the obstacles to your natural capacity for satisfaction. It's about learning to be with yourself and your experience in a way that doesn't require constant management and manipulation. It's about discovering that the pleasure you've been seeking outside yourself has been available inside yourself all along. But you couldn't access it because you were too busy accepting behaviors that blocked it. And maybe you're thinking, this sounds like too much work, too much introspection, too much effort for something that should be simple. But consider the alternative. Consider spending the rest of your life chasing a version of pleasure that never quite satisfies. Consider dying without ever knowing what it feels like to be truly at peace with yourself. Consider looking back and realizing you spent decades building a life designed for someone else's idea of satisfaction. That's the real work. The exhausting, endless work of maintaining patterns that don't serve you. What I'm suggesting is actually simpler. Stop accepting the behaviors that destroy your peace. Notice them, question them, and gradually, incrementally, choose differently. Not perfectly, not all at once, but consistently. With compassion for yourself when you fall back into old patterns, which you will. And with commitment to keep returning to presence, to feeling, to direct experience, to internal validation, to examined pleasure. That's it, that's the whole path. And here's the thing about this path, you can't do it for anyone else. You can't do it to impress people. You can't do it to be a better version of yourself. Those are just more versions of the same behaviors we've been talking about. You have to do it because you actually want to be free. Because you're tired of suffering in ways that are completely optional. Because you've finally recognized that inner peace isn't something that will happen to you someday when conditions are right. It's something you cultivate by refusing to accept the conditions that prevent it. So, where does this leave you? Right here, right now. With a choice, you can take these ideas and file them away as interesting, but ultimately irrelevant to your real life. You can agree intellectually while changing nothing behaviorally. You can wait for the perfect moment to start examining your patterns. Or you can start now, this moment. Notice what you're feeling right now. Notice if you're comparing this content to something else you've watched. Notice if you're suppressing any discomfort that's coming up. Notice if you're thinking about what you'll do later instead of being present. Notice if you're wondering what other people will think of you for watching this. Notice if this matches your assumptions about what personal growth should look like. Just notice. Because in that noticing is the beginning of freedom. In that small gap between the behavior and your awareness of it is the space where choice becomes possible. And in that choice, repeated thousands of times across thousands of moments, is the path to the inner peace you've been seeking everywhere except where it actually lives, which is here, which is now, which is in you, beneath all the noise, beneath all the patterns, beneath all the behaviors you've accepted for so long that you forgot they were choices. The 5 behaviors that destroy your inner peace are not your enemies, they're your teachers. They're showing you exactly where you're not free. And now that you see them, you can't unsee them. You'll notice comparison as it happens. You'll catch yourself suppressing. You'll feel yourself projecting into the future. You'll see yourself seeking validation. You'll recognize when you're operating on autopilot instead of examining what actually feels good. And each time you notice, you have a choice. Keep going or choose differently. And each time you choose differently, you reclaim a small piece of your peace. And those small pieces add up. Until one day you realize that the constant hum of anxiety is gone. That you're actually here, actually alive, actually capable of pleasure that doesn't depend on anything outside yourself. And that, finally, is freedom. That's what we've been talking about all along. And it's been available the entire time. You just had to stop accepting the things that blocked it. So stop accepting them. Starting now.